So now we move to the southern door, which is for many of the ceremonies that I started out in, that's the opening. So that's the opening of our ceremony. So I really want to speak a bit about bringing your music, bringing your creations, bringing your art to the world, and how we do that, as a form of exchange, as a form of giving, really thinking about our gifts and centering our gifts, but what are the different practices and approaches to doing that in a good way. So I did talk a little bit about my songwriting approaches, singing the land, really looking out on the land, using that as a map. Also collaborating with elders and other artists to listen, to learn, to grow those relationships and to keep coming back into them, to visit and share ideas. But maybe I'll talk a little bit more about actual, like the writing of the songs and the lyrical component of things in both English and in Nehiyawewin. So one of the more recent songs that I created is called No One Left Behind. Which was inspired by the words of Barbara Bruce. And it really is a song that speaks about and sings to and for and from our two-spirit relatives and that two-spirit Sundance. And so I really started that song by having a conversation with Kokum Barbara and Charlotte on the phone one night and just chatting a bit about the ceremony. This was after our first year Sundance, and having reflections on some of the things that we saw, some of the things we experienced, some of the things we remembered, everything from, the rainbow ribbons that line the outside, the perimeter of the arbor, that ceremonial space, to the different visitors we had, from, a bird that flew into the arbor to a deer that came to visit, and what some of the significance, the meaning of those different pieces were. From that conversation, I, got off the phone and I just started singing and sounding based off of the energy and sort of what I was receiving and what had kind of filled me from that visit, from that QK win. And I took my cell phone and I just started singing and improvising and really calling on spirit. And I came up with a general vocal, which was and I knew that I wanted to speak about, dancing, about coming home, about like the ways that, Kokum Barbara flew. So there's different ceremonial practices within that space that I wanted to highlight in both metaphor. So working with image-based, taste, touch, smell, sight, sound. So really working with like the five senses, and we call it like concrete image or metaphor, which is, we fly like the eagles. We dance with the bison. And then we also work from what we might also call abstract meaning or abstract ideas, concepts, or values. So it's sort of abstract to talk about belonging. It's sort of abstract to talk about love. It's sort of abstract to talk about, coming home. But when we name, like being on the land, smelling the medicines in our bodies, that might be a notion of coming home, and that might be a notion of belonging. So I really take like the five senses and those concrete images and I mix them with the abstract images. And so I kept singing and I kept sounding out the different ideas. And I started drafting sort of in a poetic flow, in a stream of consciousness. Sometimes I really like writing from there. It's like, what are all the things I remember from both the conversation with the Kokums as well as my own experience? What is really feeling alive right now? What are the, the memories? What are the different images that want to be spoken, that want to be shared? And then I start mapping it into verses and chorus, as well as a bridge. So some of the basics for songwriting structure, we always begin with the verse, one or two verse. Sometimes we'll have a little intro section, which might be a speaking moment, or maybe it's words of an elder, or maybe it's a recording you have of, a river that you really love that inspired the song. So that might be like the introduction to a piece of music. And then we figure out what is the form for the verse. So where is the rhyme gonna live? Is it rhyming at the end of each phrase or each line of text? Is it in between? And then starting to sound and sing. So, I tend to work quite intuitively between singing and writing and singing. So I don't write the whole thing and then figure out how it's going to map itself into melody and into song form. I really write and sing, and as I sing, new words or new images might come through, and it's through that I then record into the cell phone or my Zoom recording device, and then the lyrics start to unfold. And with the chorus for this particular song, I wanted the chorus to be in English and in Nehiyawewin, because I wanted to speak about some of these concepts and some of these images and these memories in language. And so for that, I called up and I gave tobacco to Senapan Thunder, who's our elder and one of the primary language teachers for our Korean Tea Sunday morning gathering place. And I also called up Joseph Natauhau, who's like my first language teacher and kind of creative collaborator uncle. And with the two of them, I tried to figure out how could I sing this in language and how could it maintain that flow and that melodic structure that I had improvised when I first started to create the song. From that, I was able to then go onto the piano and start to map some of the chords and some of the progressions that were going to support the melodic structure of the song. I don't often play the piano, but in this particular moment, I was at the Banff Center and I happened to have a beautiful grand piano in the studio I was working in, and so I felt very lucky and privileged, and I was like, let's go. And during that moment was when the bridge came forward. So, I grew up playing piano as a child, and it was both my love and my hate. Because the piano existed in my parents' basement and it was a cold, dark place. And I had to practice every day for half an hour. And I tried all the different ways to sneak my way around ever having to practice. But I did learn a lot through that. I learned that I didn't want to play classical music, and I quit cold turkey when I was 13, and I stopped playing piano for many years. But I still have some of those basics, and so even just knowing a few chords, even just knowing a few primary kind of notes helped me to create a little bit more of a structure for this song. And it was in relationship to that piano that these subtle notes came forward and this bridge section manifested. So then at that same residency, my friend Cynthia Hamer, who now goes by Bird Belly, who's an awesome Métis artist and musician based out of just north of Edmonton, and MJ Dandeneau, who's a rad two-spirit Métis artist, bassist, upright bassist, electric bassist, producer, creator extraordinaire, based in Winnipeg. The two of them were there because it was an Indigenous musicians residency at the Banff Center for Performing Arts, which is in Treaty 7, so close to where I grew up. I highly recommend checking out any and all of their Indigenous creative arts workshops, residencies that they have. Often they give full scholarship for Indigenous artists, so food, lodging, as well as creative space, studio, potentially even recording time, and mentorship from professional artists. We were creating this song together, so I brought the original music, I brought the lyrics, and in collaboration with MJ and Cynthia on guitar, MJ on upright bass, we created the next level of structure, which was what's the kind of rhythmic bass part, and then what's the other melodic or chord progressions that the guitar is going to hold for this song. And we recorded a version of it at the Banff Center, and then later that year in the summer, I was actually invited to open up for Pride in Montreal. They were doing an Indigenous artist two-spirit showcase, and I got to perform that song for my community in Jojage in Montreal, which was such a huge gift to be able to share with that community, my local urban Two-Spirit community and elders, part of the ceremonial community that I was part of, as well as this collaboration, this musical kind of creation with two Métis relatives. And I was able to co-create with other musicians in a live performance space at Place des Arts at Sankiam Sal for the opening of Pride. So it felt pretty special and pretty incredible. And in that moment, when I was rehearsing with the artists I was going to play with for Pride, we then added drum kit, violin, we had classical harp at that moment, and guitar and backup vocals. So that's where we then started to establish, okay, when do we need to rehearse the vocal sections? What are the harmonies? So what I'll often do is I'll record myself singing the bass line, and then I'll record whatever those different harmonies are, and often that comes intuitively. But sometimes, I really have to kind of map it out. And then I give those harmonies to the collaborators, other musicians, and I gave them the basic chord structure and the kind of layout of the song. But then we got to discuss, well, what kind of rhythms do we want this song to carry? And at one point in the music, I really wanted the song to sound like that powwow drum, like that Sundance drum. I really wanted the energetic of that ceremonial space to be created in this performance context, or to be kind of called to. So it's not the same. We didn't bring a powwow drum in, but on a big drum kit and on the bass drum, my drummer collaborator, Daniel, he was able to produce that kind of charging beat. I've seen a lot of different Indigenous musicians and creators mix, these notions of tradition or more ceremonial practice with, rock music, blues, jazz, hip hop, electronic. There's so many incredible musicians out there. I think of the first time I ever got to perform with Digging Roots, and they had a big powwow drum made by Tribal Spirit Music out of Quebec. And so the drummer was playing both the drum kit and the powwow drum for the show. So those types of things can be incorporated, and often I want reflections of Métis fiddling also in part of my music, but I can't always bring in a Métis fiddle player because I'm living in Montreal. So then it's exploring, like, how can we allude to some of these sonic qualities, these traditional practices, but then also put it through like a crazy reverb or delay pedal. And so really look at how is the music that I am creating today a living archive of all of those different forms of music that inspire and that inform me as a musician. So I wanted to share that component of song creation, that has its collaborative kind of components with working with elders and conversations, as well as musicians rehearsing and into recording. And I also want to speak a little bit of some of the kind of tools that I think are really essential in how to prepare for a gig. Because I think that, it's one thing to be rehearsing and creating music, but then how do we take that music into those live performance settings in a way that we can maintain a sense of comfort and confidence in knowing what we're doing, in knowing how to ask for what we need in order to make sure that that moment is going to be you giving your best self to the audience. So no matter how big, no matter how small that gig is, if it's a festival in front of 1,000 people, a soft cedar performing art space, or a community center, we want to be able to look back on the performances we've done and say, wow, that was really fun. I felt really supported, and I really was able to give my best self in that performance environment. And sometimes the performance environments aren't always what we need in the fullness. So how do we also make the best out of what we've got? And how do we do as much work as we can before we step into the performance space to prepare in communications, in having a tech writer, in sending out our bio, headshot, lyric sheets to the musicians, set list to the musicians, as well as to the sound person, as well as even to the lighting designer, as well as like notes about, stage plot. How are we setting things up? What's going where? And what do we want backstage with us? Like, oh, I really want to eat gummy bears right before the show. Okay, name that. Or like, I really like to have tea with a bit of honey so I can like warm up my voice and I can stay calm. Or can I smudge in this venue? That's been something that comes up often for me, where I'm having to engage in cultural safety best practices with directors of venues, of large scale performance spaces, museums, schools. A lot of spaces don't really like or allow smoke because of fire and safety protocols and rules. But I'm really interested in finding ways that we can build relationships around these things so that our cultural practices and these ways of ceremony can be brought into performance spaces. So in moments I've done music for theater or dance performances and someone stood next to me with a freaking fire extinguisher while I've smudged, it's this tiny little bit of smoke and there's somebody, with a whole fire extinguisher next to me. But having those conversations and really checking in with the venues, like what are ways that we can make this happen instead of just receiving, no, it's definitely not possible as the first point of communication. And worst case, back alleyways, backyards, before the gig, finding ways to do those smudges and to acknowledge those pieces. So basically one of the first things that I do outside of all that kind of coordination, when I'm getting ready for a gig, I visualize myself at the gig. I visualize myself on that stage. I visualize myself with my drum or with my looping pedal, with the microphone, like set up. I visualize myself there and I visualize the audience. And if I'm playing with musicians, I visualize them with me. And I sort of go through some of the music and some of the songs and how I'm entering, how I'm creating that space, how I'm introducing myself as a way to ground in and as a way to start to fill up my mind, body, spirit with my capacity, with my gifts, with the value of the offering that I'm making, because that whole performance is a bundle. That whole performance is a story, and within that there are these different songs which could be seen as different medicines or different moments that I'm punctuating the entirety of this journey. But the essence of it is that I'm sitting in the center of that bundle and I'm opening up myself, my history, my culture, my lineage, my language, my gifts to this audience. And in doing that, my hope is that they receive it and then they're going to give back with active listening, with smiles, with cheers, with, just the presence and the attunement to what I'm offering. The second thing that I always try to do is like, how am I taking care of my physical form? So when I'm backstage, when I've actually gotten to the gig, making sure that I'm hydrated, making sure I have water pre-placed on the stage, and working with teas, working with rat root, wike. Sometimes I'll put that in my mouth for protection, but also for hydration and anti-inflammation, and it's really supportive for vocalists and singing. And I make sure that when I'm backstage, I'm warming up, I'm getting in my body. I've got like some stretches and practices, and sometimes if I'm working with other musicians, it can feel a little silly to be in that space, but sometimes when I start to warm up, they'll warm up with me because we're all using our bodies. We're all using our tools in different ways. Or I'll go into the bathroom and I'll do different vocal warm-ups. So figuring out what are the ways that you can make sure that this vessel is fully prepared. So the mind is prepared, the body is prepared. And when I do that smudge, I'm smudging myself and whenever possible, all my gear. I smudge the microphone, I smudge the speakers, the monitor, my looping pedal, I smudge all my rattles, my drums. And the musicians and collaborators I work with, not all of them are Indigenous, and they've gotten familiar and used to me smudging them too. So the violin, the drum kit, the guitar, the harp, them, their bodies, their spirits. And while I'm doing that smudge, I'm opening up and I'm warming up my spirit. So I'm calling in, who are my helpers? Who's going to help guide me in this journey, in this performance, in this show? Who am I calling on to keep me grounded, to help me stay confident, give me the courage to share my gifts, give me the capacity to continue to sing, to remember the words to all my music, to be listening actively to both the audience, myself, and my collaborators. And so when I arrive, I always make sure that I check out the stage. Where am I performing? Do they have me performing, at the back of a conference room? Are there chairs stacked up right next to me? What do I need to do to ensure that where I'm going to be sharing my music and sharing my stories, that it feels like the right set, the right space for that? And if something doesn't feel right, who can I ask? Is there a stagehand? Is there somebody there that can help me set things up in a way that does feel right? This is my ceremony. This is my space. I'm going to be occupying it for 30 minutes to an hour or however long the set is. I always make sure, is the microphone stand set up in a good way? Is it at the right height? So this is why sound checks are so important. If you can't do a sound check, if you're only doing a line check, which is where basically they set all the gear on the stage, you kind of do like a one-off, like quick little sound check. Make sure that before you start, everything is in its right place. Is the monitor facing me properly? Do I have enough of my vocals in the monitor? Is the drum too loud? So really listening and knowing that it's okay to ask for what you need. Getting to know the sound person, what's their name? Being friendly with the people helping is so essential because they're gonna give you what you need. And if you need more reverb midway through the show, they're gonna be the ones who are gonna give that to you. And so that's why having that song sheet, that's why having your set list for the sound guy, for the lighting person. Are there different cues that you want throughout the show? And one thing that I sometimes share with emerging artists is if you really suffer from stage fright, which is very common. I always get super nervous before a show. I'm not sure it'll ever go away. But it's what we do with that fear. It's what we do with those nerves. It's what we do with that anxiety that's going to make all the difference. That's why having water close by. That's why knowing maybe some of our breathing techniques and practices. That's why doing the prayer is going to really help us to stay in that centered place. But I often say, if you're freaking out about the spotlight or the lights that are shining on you, just imagine that light is the moonlight. Just imagine that you're receiving that beautiful, gentle glow from, Tipskaoy Pisim, from Kukumanao, from that grandmother. And all those people in the audience, imagine them as trees. You're in the forest and you are singing your heart song to the trees. And those trees are not judging you. They're not comparing you to others. They're not critiquing you. Those trees are just holding witness. They're receiving. And even beyond that, they're giving back. They're giving back energy, and they're giving you breath, and they're giving you oxygen. And just really holding into the consciousness and into the spirit of what you're doing, that you are doing this as a gift and as an offering. And so in preparing for the gig, making sure that you have plenty of rehearsals. And if you can't rehearse with the musicians as often as you want, recording your rehearsals. I can't stress enough how important it is to record the growth of process throughout. I talked about recording things in the song creation process, of writing, of note-taking, of verbally recording things, sometimes drawing pictures. And then in the rehearsal space, recording those rehearsals so you can listen back and, okay, that drum beat arrived at a different time than I'd like it to, or maybe I want just like a stable guitar rhythm in this section and less movement. So you can start to listen to those different voices and how they communicate with one another and how you're placing your voice in relationship to that whole system. And then for preparing, singing and rehearsing and practicing those songs while you're walking down the street, while you're driving in your car, while you're getting groceries. So like allowing it to be part of your body and your consciousness and your memory, not just in moments that are like formally creative moments, but that are like creation is alive in every moment of my existence. I'm cooking dinner. I'm listening to the songs I'm going to be performing at the gig tomorrow night. This is a moment of just being in relationship to the music so that it's like a helper that's always accompanying you. And so part of those more formal things that I've already named are also having a stage plot, which is like where are all the musicians going within a performance space. And you might have like for smaller ensemble, for larger ensemble, what are your needs? Do you need a boom microphone stand, which bends, or do you need a straight mic stand? So really being clear, and if you don't know all the names of all those tech things, connecting with someone who does, so that you can start to have that in your toolkit, like the knowledge of knowing how to be clear and specific with what your needs are. And then beyond that is the tech writer, which basically names any needs that you have off the stage and beyond the stage. So in closing up this more kind of skill building, craft forming, Southern direction, Apitawegesiganok, I just want to come back to, what is your message when you are preparing and when you are writing and when you are creating and then when you're performing. Making a list. What are 3 things that are worth fighting for, that you stand for, and that you sing or you create for? So like what and who do you believe in? I've already shared a few of mine, like really relating and wanting to uplift water as like a sacred life way. So how do I go about doing that? I invite others to call in and to think about their relationships to water. Who do you believe in? Who are those heroes, those mentors, those elders, and what are the teachings that they've shared to you that you are also wanting to share and expand on in your own creative practice? And then in also thinking about this, who is your dream collaborator? Don't be shy, What would your dream collaboration be? So also in that kind of notion of visualizing, like what is your biggest, wildest performance setting that you would like to see yourself in? Oh my gosh, I've always wanted to go to Australia and perform at the Sydney Opera House. How incredible would that be? And to meet like a local Aboriginal hip hop musician and co-write a song about our, lineages, or, young people resisting the police, like whatever it is, what's the resistance existence movement that you're creating with your work? So how is your message also important for others to hear? And who do you want to hear that message? Write a song to those relatives. And then while you write that song, you are animating and you are making that wish, that gift, that prayer, you are making it alive in that creation that you are taking on.